So we've come to the main event for the evening. I'll welcome you all to the American Institute of Philosophical and Cultural Thought here in Murfreesboro, Illinois. And what I want to do is I want to bring up Pete Gunter to introduce our main speaker for the evening. And Pete's going to tell you a little bit about Lewis Hahn and a little bit about Doug Anderson. And these are very, very important things for you to learn. But before I bring up Pete, I need to say something about how we got to where we are in the development of this institute and in the development of our mission in the AIPCT. Pete is the chairman of the board of the Foundation for the Philosophy of Creativity. And he'll tell you about that, and he'll tell you about their history and how we came to have a Lewis Hahn lecture. But the AIPCT has been in existence for about 1.5 years now, and we have made tremendous progress in the direction of programming in education, archiving, digitization, and the conservation of American thought and humanistic thought in America. You are surrounded by some 30,000 volumes and valuable papers and art in the history of American thought. And part of the reason we are able to do what we are doing is because the Foundation for the Philosophy of Creativity saw that they needed to be associated with what we're doing, and they've been very, very supportive. And this is the second Hahn lecture that we've held at the AIPCT. And so they moved their Hahn lecture to this location. And the last Hahn lecturer was Pete Iey Adventure of the University of North Texas, Regents Professor of Philosophy there, Emeritus. And he knows some things about the foundation and about Doug Anderson that he's going to tell you, and also about why you should pay attention to this kind of humanistic thought in the past, in the future, and in the present. So, Pete.
I'll do the best I can to cover all of that. Well, that's a lot. Foundation for Philosophy of Creativity was officially created back in 1957 and has been the longest running association involved with meeting with the American Philosophical Association. And some of that may change, but that's how long we've been around. It was created by a gentleman named Bill Miner, who came to Carbondale, and which many of you may have known or known of. The goal of that foundation and the societies which it sponsored, which was to get people to thinking about creativity, to try to conceptualize it, to try to make people know the philosophers who took it seriously, and to draw the conclusions from the belief that creativity is something real. Not everybody thinks it is, after all. Lewis Hahn was one of the people who stuck with this society through thick and thin and year after year, and really helped it, and his persistence was a great help to us. So that when we decided, not 3-4 years ago, to have a series of lectures, then Lewis Hahn's name was the name that we thought we would choose, and I think it was chosen well. I'm going to divert from this for just a second and tell you a story about Lewis Hahn's family. I'm writing a novel, or trying to, about the Civil War in what we call North Texas, along the south side of the Red River, and Indian Territory that's now called Oklahoma. There was a very mean and very bitter guerrilla warfare that happened there, and nobody knows about it. So Lewis Hahn's family was living in the same town where all my people were from, or out in the country from Gainesville, about 3 miles south of the Red River in Indian Territory. And there were many Unionists in those counties. They organized a secret group or league, and the Confederates believed this league was going to bring an army down from Kansas to invade Texas. Nobody knows about this. Okay, it's utterly unknown history. But Louis Hahn's family was there at the time. I don't know that this belongs, but it is a hell of a good story, and it's true, which I put into the novel because I couldn't resist. What the Confederates did was get posses to go out and arrest Unionists. Later on, they hanged 44 Unionists, called the Great Hanging, but there was nothing great about it. So they go out to the Hahns. Now, the Hahns were German, and Germans were not trusted in Texas during the Civil War for reasons that would be interesting to discuss. So the posse comes up. Mr. Hahn is hiding up in the barn in the hay, and Mrs. Hahn is up on the front porch. So Mrs. Hahn, they come up to her and say, Miss Hahn, we know your husband's here. We're going to take him back with them to Gainesville and ask him some questions about the Union League. And you hand him over. And she says, well, he is in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He is doing business. He will be back here in 4 weeks, but he is not here now, and so he cannot go with you. And so they say, we know he's here, and we know he's a son of a bitch, and we're going to get him. They weren't very nice about any of this. So this goes on for about 15 minutes, and it's a cold night, and the horses are standing there, and finally she goes up to these guys. Now she's 5'1", and she goes up to these guys and said, "We are good friends with the Indians. They trust us. They like us. If you do anything to Mr. Hahn, they will burn your damned village to the ground." Well, there was a shuffling of horses' feet and the exhaling of frost and mist into the air from the horses, and a moment of zen among the posse, which turned around and went back to town and left Mr. Hahn alone. I thought I would throw that in as something kind of a picture of Louis Hahn's background. He was a good philosopher. He stuck with us. He understood what we were trying to do, and so the lecture is named for him, and I thought it was a great honor to give it last year. Now, let me turn back around and note that I am at the University of North Texas, founded the philosophy department there, which is now a Department of Philosophy and Religion Studies. Retired from the chairmanship after a long decade, but retired from the university, but still teach one course a semester. The previous chairman was a lady who had considerable abilities, and I got along with her, but a lot of other people didn't. So she resigned and went somewhere else to a high position, and we didn't have a chairman. And Randall Oxer was very helpful in recommending Douglas Anderson to us. And what I want to say about Doug is twofold. One is, for the first time, I got to hear his music last night at the Mexican restaurant here in town. I really liked it. And I want to add that I thought it was very well played, but he picked every one of my favorite songs, which shows what a genius of taste this guy is. He really is great at music, and picked some nice stuff. That was great. But equally great is what he's done as chairman at the University of North Texas. Not only has he managed to get people to get along with each other, which is, if you've ever dealt with departments in universities, that's a primary desideratum. You must have that. Or you get a snake pit, as they are sometimes, some departments are called. Well, ours isn't. He also has been able to convince the university that we're able to get grants and we're able to be well known, and so he's sort of ingratiated the philosophy department into a university that is not known for its high intellectual feats. It's not, well, I'll leave. It has a very good music school. Very good music school. So Doug is going to talk tonight about the de-professionalizing of American philosophy. And this is a unique kind of a topic, and I would look very curious as to what he has to say. It seems to me that if, now this is just me, but Doug might agree, and Randy might agree, that if philosophy doesn't change some of its spots and relate itself to the world, we're not going to have philosophy departments. or minimally so. So if you can de-professionalize philosophy, you could bring it into contact with life and with culture and with people, and that would make it an active and a creative and a fruitful thing in American intellectual life and American life generally. Never mind intellect, how about life? So I'm looking forward to it very much. Doug?
Talk in English this year. Spent a lot of time in China recently. It's in English, but they don't understand, so it has to get translated. First, a couple of thank yous to the Foundation for Philosophy and Creativity, American Institute of Philosophical and Cultural Thought. It says AIPCT.
It's hard to say.
But I appreciate very much the opportunity to come and say a few things tonight, and also for inviting my two old friends who told lots of lies earlier in the day, Stephen and John, and a couple other things. First, Louis Hahn. When I was a young, non-professional philosopher, my mentor was a man by the name of Carl Hausman, who wrote all the time about creativity, and was a friend of Hahn and Miner as well.
And a member of our group.
And they got me into, I don't know, something in Chicago. It was probably Central APA, one of those things. And I met Louis Hahn, and he was sort of like a big, gentle bear, very calm, and yet very firm in his thought, which was a good model. It was an exemplary kind of, if you're going to have a profession, having people like Louis Hahn is a good way to have it. That was not always, as you will see from some of my notes tonight, the way the APA worked when I was younger. It was much more of a dogfight all the way around. I also want to note two of my other mentors who were not my teachers, but were my teachers, and that's John McDermott at Texas A&M and John E. Smith of Yale University. John McDermott's still alive down in Texas. He's not doing particularly well, but he's there and still kicking. And these were two of the most fabulous philosophy teachers in the history of American culture. Neither of whom, as we noted earlier, tried to make any of their students become them. And one of the reasons people tend not to read McDermott and Smith anymore is because their students didn't become them. They didn't try to create a cult of who they were or what they did. And the other thing about them, other than being both Irish and liking to drink, although McDermott has now been sober for some 35, 40 years, doesn't mean he doesn't like to drink. It means he just doesn't do it anymore. So these two Irish guys would get together, and they were the best two speakers of philosophy that I ever heard. And I've heard a lot. They were relaxed, they were passionate, they were informed, and they studied like hell. People see John McDermott, and he's kind of crazy and wild. When you talk to him, he knew medieval philosophy, he knew ancient philosophy, he knew Latin, he knew Greek, and the same for John Smith. And so I learned American philosophy under the tutelage of those two characters, and I will call them characters because they were. I remember going to a dog and pony show at Cambridge University in England, and of course the British always make fun of the Americans, not quite as badly as the Germans do, but still a little bit. And these two just played with the, toyed, I would be a better way to put it, with the British scholars in the room when they were asked serious questions about this, that, and the other thing, because they knew Kant and Hegel just as well as anybody in the room. So I learned that you can be someone who studies philosophy and be a genuine human being. And I learned that from Carl Hausman as well. So I've been very lucky in the mentors I've had over the years. But they also taught me some other things having to do with the 20th century and what happened to philosophy in the United States, and I think around the world. It's come back to haunt Germany now, who's going through similar kinds of problems, the reduction of humanities programs and an upscale in the STEM materials. And a lot of that has to do with what we did to philosophy and what's called a profession of philosophy. I've always liked to make a distinction in my classroom between profession and confession, and those who know a little bit of Latin will know that professors are throwing their words at people, which I'm doing now and don't like to do, as opposed to confessing, which is when you speak with people. And of course, we also use in English the word confession to mean to tell us about ourselves, our lives, and so forth. And that kind of sharing strikes me as a much better way to do philosophy. It is how the Greeks did philosophy, and it's the way they understood philosophy as a love of wisdom. The Greeks did not have schools, well, we call them schools of philosophy. They weren't really schools of philosophy. They were people living together, studying together, and finding ways to live together. And I think it's important to remember that that's how what we call Western philosophy began. It did not begin at all as something called a profession. So what I want to talk about is something I routinely call philosophy Americana, and the reason I do that is to sort of make an analogy to music, Americana music, which means it's eclectic, it's mixed. I love Tex-Mex music because it's Tex and Mex. You mentioned Louis Hahn being a German in Texas. The reason there are accordions in Mexican music is because it was brought there by Czechs and Germans, right? The reason they sound like oompa bands when they're playing Saturday night rancheros is because the Czechs and the Germans and the Mexicans were all playing music together. Mestiza music, music that's mixed. And I think that philosophy ought to be doing the same thing. I think that we should not be in schools of continentals and Americanists and analysts and whatever we are. We always have to identify ourselves. By the way, I know that all of you are not philosophers and all are not professional philosophers, so I apologize for the sort of in-house stuff that goes on in what I have to say. But feel free to ask questions about it. Because what I have to say really is about humans and other things in the natural world and not so much about the something called professional philosophy. What I'm trying to get back to is to not do what I'm going to do for the next 25 minutes, which is to read to you. Because this is the kind of venue, the kind of way we've sort of put it together in recent years. Well, in the last, since 1903, when the APA got itself off the ground. I want to introduce you, those who don't know. Many of you will know who Waldo Emerson was, but many of you will not know who Henry Bugbee was. And this is my favorite little book from the 20th century called The Inward Morning, title stolen from Thoreau. And Henry Bugbee was a student of philosophy and religion at Princeton University, did a postdoc at Harvard with, those of you who know philosophy, Quine and Putnam were both there. And Quine and Putnam thought this was one of the most brilliant thinkers they had ever encountered, and both committed that in writing. But Bugbee wrote The Inward Morning. It was absolutely unacceptable in American culture at the time. And it remains one of the most beautiful philosophical books. It's basically a diary of philosophy over the course of a year, beginning in British Columbia, recalling his time in World War II, bringing that together with existentialism and pragmatism and a variety of other things. And it begins in a diner. He's sitting in a diner writing these notes. And to me, The Inward Morning is what philosophy ought to be, as opposed to what Quine and Putnam made it to be, or helped make it to be. So, philosophy Americana, a little bit of Emerson and Bugbee, and the de-professionalizing of philosophy. Because I've written extensively about Charles Peirce, Americanists have often called me a Peircean, who apparently should look down on Jamesians and Deweyans. Now that's from the Peirceans because the Jamesians will tell me, well, he was just really smart mathematical, so that's tough stuff. So we can look down on the Jamesians and the Deweyans. Of course, the Deweyans just talk about politics and daily life, and they're pretty tedious. So this was the story I was told. This is how I was brought into philosophy. You're a Peircean, you do that logic shit. And because I'm supposedly a Peircean, other philosophers have often called me a pragmatist. I was even labeled at one point a neo-pragmatist for God knows what reason in a book. Those of you who know the difference between the two will know that's really unusual. But if I were to bother to give myself such a label, it might be more like working mystic. I grew up a kid sitting in swamps on weekend mornings watching red-winged blackbirds work and play. working mystic. On the whole, the professional pigeonholing seems to me like first-rate nonsense and is based primarily on the surface of one's thinking. Like the little acronyms AOS and AOC, those of you who are graduate students who want to be changing jobs as professors will know that AOC is area of competence and AOS is area of specialty. So you are made to pigeonhole yourself in order to find work. I think these things are tools of the profession, and I mean that term in its most pejorative sense. If you have to classify yourself before you go somewhere, you are already misunderstood, because none of us is any simply area of competence or area of specialty. We're human beings who are thinking things through. Anyway, I focus much of my reading in philosophy on American philosophy because I realized that I would need at least 10 more years of Greek language if I were to say anything intelligent at all about Plato or Parmenides. And I have spent the rest of my life reading those characters. I love Greek philosophy, but I can't be an expert. I just cannot read the Greek fluently. And if you've ever gone to a foreign country, I go to China, I get a little bit of what's going on, but not much. And a philosophy comes with a culture. If you are not in part in that culture, you are not going to understand what the hell they're talking about as ways of life, as what's important ethically and morally, as what's important aesthetically and so forth. And if you have ever seen Chinese paintings, those of you who maybe know a little bit of the history of art, to a Westerner they look kind of washed out and dull and repetitive. But if you know the story, if you know the culture, there's another way to look at those paintings. And it's too easy to miss that. So I ended up reading American philosophy because I do know English. I also know a little bit about New England, where I grew up, not far from Thoreau and Emerson and Margaret Fuller and a variety of others. So each of us who awakens to the love of wisdom, that's the Greek word for philosophy, has an extensive foundation undergirding and underwriting our being a continentalist or a pragmatist or an ethicist or an idealist or whatever ism you want to put on it. Like Hawaii, we reveal only the most superficial tier of our being. Mauna Loa in particular is 13,000 feet above sea level and 5 miles below sea level. Jonathan Barnes, an analytic ancient philosopher from the University of Texas, in describing his version of professional philosophy, claimed that philosophy had nothing to do with history, place, or culture. I find this a startling claim, given the differences we find even among the Greeks from Miletus and Iey. A love of wisdom, as I see it, cannot escape its foundation in place, history, and culture. Our premises, those beliefs and faiths that drive us, all lie waiting and slowly churning in that undergirding foundation of our being. And those are the places I find most intriguing to explore, though they may be difficult to reach. I never met Waldo Emerson or Henry Bugbee, but I have taken extensive walks with both on many occasions. Mostly walks in the woods along northern streams and what we New Englanders still want to call mountains. Anyone from Colorado would not call New England hills mountains, but we do. As Emerson noted in his journal, the good of going into the mountains is that life is reconsidered. It is far from the slavery of your own modes of living. It's an interesting way of thinking what we do every day is slavery. And you have opportunity of viewing the town at such a distance as may afford you a just view, nor can you have any such mistaken apprehensions as might be expected from the place you occupy and the round customs you run at home. It's about getting out of gear with yourself. Occasionally, I've also walked with them in deserts, among wildflowers, sand, sage, and an endless sky. We've walked together in the premises of our lives. Premises is a neat little word. It means both the thoughts through which we live and the ground upon which we walk. As Bugbee repeatedly pointed out, we live on both sorts of premises at every turn in life. So a long quotation from Henry here. I have connected the appreciation of things and their importance with the understanding of them in their reality. once again arriving at the thought that both turn upon a person's fulfillment of what is demanded of him or her, not merely in reflective act, but also as action of any sort, may fulfill the requirements of his or her devolving upon him or her. If this thought obtains, then the life we lead and the philosophy we believe in our hearts cannot be independent from one another. I speak of the philosophy we believe in our hearts, following Peirce, this is still Bugbee, however, with the reservation in mind that it seems most difficult to learn what we believe in our hearts. So professionally, it's easy to say things, to write things that are only vaguely related to what is in our hearts. Indeed, much of the profession of the last century has been enlisted in getting us to move away from or to repress what we believe in our hearts. Modern philosophy, going back now to the 1600s and moving forward to where I think we've come, modern philosophy was an extended game of controlling premises. If we allow Spinoza his causa sui, we will find it difficult to fend off what follows. Entering Hegel's world is like putting a hand on the tar baby. So difficult to get away. This is why Hegelians and Marxists seem so convincing. All of this thought, as Peirce and Dewey pointed out, was premised on the possibility of human certainty, a kind of species arrogance. 20th century analytic philosophy, as I see it, was simply a narrowly conceived degenerate version of the modern's quest for certainty. Although, for example, Ayer rejected the deductive closed systems of the moderns, he also reduced philosophy to analysis of language, on his account completely devoid of metaphysical content, such that he actually believed that all truly philosophical questions would be answered by the end of the 20th century. He later changed his mind and found God, which is a little interesting. I didn't even know the history of Ayer. A nice man, but I think thoroughly deluded in the 1930s. The arrogance of analysis was, if anything, greater than the arrogance of the system builders. Philosophy in its modernist guise was a competition among closed systems. If you control the premises, you control the outcomes. A fabulous imaginative dream. What could be more imaginative or imaginary than the world of Spinoza's ethics? And those of you who don't know it, it is a fascinating but unusual world. Or Leibniz's Monodology, which is one of my favorite books to teach. So here is a serious philosopher from the middle of Europe claiming that we are monads. And they are very peculiar little beings. Some of them are windowless. Some of them have windows directly to the big monad. Anyway, you can see this. You start thinking about Tinker Toys or Legos. If you piece them together in the right way, you control the outcome. Monads are, as Leibniz suggests, incorporeal automata. You think about that for a minute. Incorporeal, no bodies, but they're automata. Robots without bodies. Interesting to try to imagine what that looks like. Where and how are we to find such beings? I will return later to the importance of imagining, but Peirce, among others, pointed out that the a priori imagination is hopelessly unconstrained by the actualities of the world. Going looking for monads is nothing more than an intellectual snipe hunt. Moreover, the moderns, who were not professional philosophers, it's important to remember that they were doctors and business people and lens grinders and statespeople, but they were not professional philosophers. So the moderns who were not professional philosophers laid the groundwork for the disease of professionalism, a knack for stilted writing, thinking in narrow tracks, becoming litigious in our conversations, and seeking and enjoying cheap and hollow victories. It makes little difference to me whether one is classed as an analytic philosopher, a hermeneut, a Straussian, a pragmatist, or a phenomenologist. We have all become followers of vocabularies and styles that give us away and through which we must perform if we wish to publish and gain some sort of standing in our little professional worlds. Now, for those of you who are not philosophers, if you go to a philosophy conference, you look for black t-shirts and berets and black pants, tightly worn, or you look for really long, scraggly-haired beards, things hanging down like this, and you usually see somebody walking around and a bunch of little duckies following behind. and that's called a school of philosophy. There are all versions of these. The point is, we all have costumes. I wear my hippie costume, but we all have costumes. But I think it's very unhelpful in the world of the love of wisdom to be stuck and located in this way, or to locate ourselves in this way. So I'm not even letting the Americanists out of this. We do it the same. We do it a little nicer, but we do it. All right, so in Mercutio's words, a plague on all our houses. There's something wrong with what we've been doing. In becoming professional philosophers, we have inflicted ourselves with a wormy disease, which, because of its ability to creep into our souls, not unlike a wood-boring beetle in a standing pine, is difficult to eradicate. Like the beetle, it becomes part of our substance and gains a say in how our reflections about it go on. That is, we use the same vocabulary and style to try to eradicate the disease we have. This seems to me dysfunctional. And you will note, those of you who are clever, that I am doing it at the moment. What I've been trying to say for many years always comes to me in my walks with Emerson and Bugbee. We do not find ourselves in a closed system. We have simply been trying to find a safe haven in a world of actual loss and losing. As Bugbee notes, philosophy is not a making of a home for the mind out of reality. It is more like learning to leave things be, restoration in wilderness, here and now. Nor can we, with linguistic analysis, simply hand over all wisdom to science and bury our noses in little meaningless problems of related language systems. We have the wrong idea about our premises. They are possibilities, not actualities. Bugbee says more on this at length. Against the professional insistence that one can and should be clear from the start about what he or she starts from, premises and assumptions, that the procedure and the direction of thought worth undertaking should be equally clear, I'm going to try to be faithful to the intimations I have had, that the reflection worth indulging doesn't know where it's going. Just as the life that is lived underlies anything, the individual is able to patent for himself or herself. Now this squares up with my own understanding of creativity, which is to say we may, when we create anything, have a general idea where it's going to go. But the actual making of the product, whatever it is, really changes over the course of the making. So that I want to write a song or a poem about X, Y, or Z. By the time I get there, it's changed. Those who have just finished your dissertations, did it change a little on the way?
A lot.
Yeah. So creativity is not something that comes clear and fixed at the beginning. It's something that comes with a kind of vagueness to start and gets worked out in the process of the creating. So creative thinking may have some sort of vague telos, or what Dewey called an end in view, but that end is never present in clarity and distinctness until the creative process ends. That is, if we think it ends. Even then, we might say that its meaning is just beginning its own adventure. Think of Mona Lisa, for example, which we usually classify as the standard art from the Renaissance. Notice that you can say things about it because you know about cars, buses, and airplanes that nobody could have said anything about in 1700. So your reading of the Mona Lisa and what's going on behind her could be radically different than anything that was done in 1700. And that means that the life of Mona Lisa, which is a creative product or act, is ongoing. It's not stopped when it was created, it's not stopped yet, and it's not likely to be stopped in the future. Analysis, by definition, is limitedly creative. It develops intellectual video games along the lines of Rawls and Brandom. I know that Rawlsians will not like me to say that. I don't think Brandom people will mind so much. Generic characters stand in for the rest of us and play through the process. So if you think of Rawls's veil and the little character sitting behind it, you might as well think of a video game and the little people you're manipulating, because you get to dictate who they are and what they do. And I've never bought the veil of ignorance. Right? The world is full of gamblers, as much as full of people who want what's perfectly going to work out. So it depends on who's behind that veil. And if you control who's behind that veil, you get to pick your politics. I think that's a dangerous way to think about the world. But it is what analytic philosophy has done for most of the 20th century. So in the one case you have, with Rawls, someone governing the polis, and in the other of making meaning, or making meanings explicit. They create little worlds in which we can safely live and work. It is, I think, somewhat like the life of a frightened ostrich. A fuller creativity emerges when we awaken to and accept the fact that we do not know for sure where we are going. That makes philosophical creativity, for me, more closely akin to what the Greeks called poesis. As George Santayana put it, in its primary substance and texture, poetry is more philosophical than prose because it is nearer to our immediate experiences. The love of wisdom grows from and through our experiences, childhood swamps, family dramas, political crises, in diners, coffee shops, bars, and bedrooms. It's a human endeavor, not an intellectual specialty. I live with the transcendentalist, the pragmatist, and Henry Bugbee on this particular premise. It changes our ideas of creativity. Emerson opens his account of experience with the following analogy. Where do we find ourselves? In a series of which we do not know the extremes and believe that it has none, we wake and find ourselves on a stair. There are stairs below us which we seem to have ascended, and there are stairs above us, many a one which go upward and out of sight. I've always loved this image of standing on the stairway to nowhere. So it's not a stairway to heaven. It's a stairway to we don't know where, from we don't know where. And that's really who we are. Finitude and fallibility is our bequest, at least for the present. And the reason I say for the present is because the transhumanists and the posthumanists have ideas that one day we may not be that kind of creature anymore. But for now, I think we are. Philosophy has, I think, for too long tried to grasp the ground floor where the stairs begin and the attic in which they end. It seems so much easier to think if we know where we are, and if we see the world as a closed system of matter or language that has definitive answers. Life is then like being in a video game that, regardless of how complex we make it, still has a software package that underwrites whatever happens. In my experience, that is not our life. We are forgetful and delusional. We forget that we too are animals. Some say rational animals, but our rationality is a potentiality, not an actuality. Some say we are social animals, but we have tremendous antisocial tendencies. Witnessing the U.S. in its present states, separating infants from mothers for whatever reason, I am hard-pressed to consider us as rational or social. We are animals. That is something the post and transhumanists have gotten right for sure. Our exceptionalism is a function of arrogance, not science. We are animals floating in space, on a planet, in a solar system, in a galaxy, in a universe, whatever that is. We do not know in any real sense where we came from, nor where we are going. In this vein, I'm always struck by the football player who praises God for a touchdown, but leaves God out of the equation at the death of one's child. I'm okay with gods, but we should not excuse them. Gods must take their responsibilities seriously too. I think modern philosophy and later analytic philosophy lost their way precisely when they thought that we could find our way at every turn, either through deduction or through inductive science. How arrogant is a book entitled Consciousness Explained? Does Daniel Dennett seriously believe that science will not change its mind many times in the future? I really don't know what Dennett thinks, but it's an arrogant title. Even if it were ironic, it's arrogant in a way that we should not be arrogant. Whatever God, law, fate, and power we try to set up between us and our finitude seems to me just another filter intended to make the picture of our actual situation look just a little bit better than it actually is. This is what Santayana neatly named our normal madness, which we all have. Nobody's excuse from this. I'm just going to pick on Christianity for a moment because that's where I grew up in this Calvinist world in New England. Christians, for example, make light of American Indian spirits, but are okay with talking snakes, devils, and walking on water. Think of that for a moment. Those are normal madnesses. I have not met a talking snake. I've met a lot of snakes. I have not yet been able to walk on water. I think I met the devil and he was in my department. Oh well. So
not your current one.
Well, I've been in several. You do recall I was at Penn State at one point. That's another inside joke. Normal madness is simply the madness we embrace as our own. It is both madness and arrogance to think that we humans, and we philosophers in particular, somehow transcend our finitude and the precariousness of our actual situation. Bugbee took another trail and was essentially ousted from the profession when he wrote The Inward Morning. Now there's another connection there for me. I did attend Penn State as a graduate student. That department was founded by a man named John Anderson, similar to what you did in North Texas. And John was basically an engineer from California, went to the war, came back, wanted something to do as a mathematician as well, and he got offered, why don't you come to Penn State and make a philosophy program? Which he did, and he brought a bunch of Germans over from Europe and turned it into the best continental program in the world because they knew what the hell they were talking about. Well, in the midst of this, John was a good friend of Henry Bugbee. And part of that correspondence is now lost, that is the John Anderson part, unfortunately. And John was another mentor for me. He used to get me up at 5 a.m. to go watch the sunrise and look at Chinese art in his back patio, which I never quite understood what was going on, but it was a bonding process of sorts. Anyway, John and Henry were very close, and they wrote about, so Bugbee wrote to John and said, what should I do with this manuscript that I have? And this is fascinating little letter back says, well, those university publishers are not really going to like what you're doing. So John started what was called the Bald Eagle Press, right there in State College, Pennsylvania. And this little book was first published by the Bald Eagle Press along with John's 3 books because they knew, or John knew, they wouldn't be published anywhere else. So think about writing about Thoreau, Emerson, and Heidegger and the frontier of the United States in 1960. If you're a philosopher, you know that's not going anywhere. And it's a beautiful book. I mean, John's book, An American Frontier, and Thoreau is a fabulous book. But this Inward Morning and those books couldn't have made it anywhere in what we called our profession at the time. Probably still couldn't. Maybe in a literature place. Anyway, so John and Henry talked about what to do with this book. But what Bugbee says is not out of this world, but in this world we are. Reminds me of Yoda when he says it. Not out of this world, but in this world we are. In and out of this world as fellow creatures, we cannot know in advance what we must do. Only so do we find out where we have always been in all creation, a true wilderness. That is the home in which things other than ourselves may be welcomed as guests, where innocence is sacred, and helplessness moves us not to abandon the helpless in spite of our not knowing how to help. I want to parse that out a little bit. You don't parse out, you parse down. Doesn't matter. I want to think about what he's saying here for a moment. First of all, wilderness, the wilderness in the United States was only a wilderness to Europeans. The Native Americans were quite at home, and they didn't think of it as a wilderness. It wasn't wild for them, it was where they lived. It was their home. But what Bugbee is up to here is saying that there is a wilderness even for Native Americans and for everyone else, and that is the universe. We really don't know where we are. Now, he'd been reading a little bit of Heidegger, so there's a little bit of that in there. He's also he was driving T.H. Suzuki all over the country, so he was getting some Japanese Buddhism tossed in with us, and you can see these things going through his mind. The American wilderness now becomes the universe. And we're lost. We are frankly lost. Now, if you're lost and you come across people who are in dire need, what are you going to do? You either shoot them and eat them, or you try to help, even though you do not know how to help. And you don't know what you can do or what they need. But this is the kind of story that he's talking about. You can welcome everybody as a guest in the wilderness. This goes back a little bit to the Cynics and Diogenes being cosmopolitan. Home is where you're at, and you got to make it a home. If you don't make it a home, all those other things happen. And none of us is outside that particular wilderness. We're caught there. So we can welcome in this true wilderness, everyone else is a guest. We try to help those who need help, even though we don't know how to help. So it was the normal madness of our profession that excluded Bugbee and lauded the tedium of Quine and Putnam, with whom he initially worked. I know Randy doesn't agree about that, but I find them tedious. Boring, absolutely boring. I did that book, but geez. I mean, I think some days, how do you wake up in the morning if you know you got to write that in the afternoon? I'm being much too cynical and hard on these folks, I know, but that became my experience over the years. I mean, there's some of these things, never mind. I won't go. The P's and the Q's, folks. It's not that I can't do it or don't find it interesting in some ways, but when it becomes my lifestyle, I want any part of it. It was the normal, so I got Quine and Putnam out there. With Bugbee, we are always on the road, always carving out a place to camp in this immense wilderness. He does have some wonderful image in the book, where, so if you know, any of you go camping, I don't mean a campground, I mean out there, you got to build a fire out of what's there. I remember it was pouring rain once. I was camping out with two friends in Quebec. Pouring rain. How do you start a fire in pouring rain in these little noodly hardwood deciduous forests of the north? Anybody know the answer? No, white birches. It's the same ones he was swinging on. Because if you pull apart the bark, you get underneath in the white birches, it's all oil. Those things will torch up like anything. Doesn't matter how much rain is going on. So if you get stuck up there, bring your matches and find yourself a little white birch. But what Bugbee is saying is that wherever you find yourself, New York City, Saigon, doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do is finding a way to be at home. Take what's at hand. Live with what's there. I was watching Anthony Bourdain for the first time. I hadn't watched all this stuff. But he was fabulous. He's there in Saigon. He's not bringing America to Saigon. He's trying to figure out, what the hell can I do here? It's of interest. It's interesting. How can I find out what's actually happening? And I think that that's what Bugbee is thinking about in terms of being a lover of wisdom. Right? Trying to find ways to be at home with what's at hand wherever we find ourselves. Carving out a little place to camp in the immense wilderness. Now, we may bring some things along with us, bring your matches, but not everything fits in the wagon, if in fact you have a wagon. For the most part, we have to deal with this wilderness by finding what is useful at hand, what is useful to improving our lives. Wisdom, says Santayana, is an evanescent madness, when the dream still continues but no longer deceives. So they're kind of madnesses that are not too bad for us. Plato is onto the same thing, I think. Now this is the point of Bugbee's borrowing his title from Thoreau's poem, Our Inward Morning. In an awakening that sees through the normal madnesses and no longer deceives. I don't think any of us gets to that kind of clarity about existence, but we can certainly do better than we do most of the time, and that's what Bugbee was up to. How do we get a little bit of clarity about when we're being deceived or self-deceived? Our home is the unstable and precarious wilderness of nature, the nature of the cosmos, not just of the earth. And in this wilderness, the mechanics of our relations are loose and vague. This is a different world to face than that of the lovers of clarity and distinctness, who have, as Bugbee says, homed in on the beam of certainty, working within premises and procedural rules that are explicit and not in question. One can be sure of what he or she is saying then. In Bugbee's wilderness, we must beware an arrogance that thinks we can make it all explicit. The love of wisdom is a natural emotion for the human animal, but it seems not to be universal. I don't believe one becomes a philosopher simply by reading books and winning debates. The earliest and best American philosophers did not graduate with degrees in philosophy. Indeed, I think that learning to be a professional philosopher may be most extremely detrimental to one's attempt to love wisdom and seek a good life. And I think my own career is evidence enough of that. The Greeks initiated reflection on their love of wisdom by asking about ways to live well. My education, and I would actually call it training, as a professional philosopher, took me farther and farther from this aim. I was taught to be combative and argumentative. It was classic when I was young to know more quotations than anybody else. I could tell you page 250 of Being in Time. And I could tell you what was there. This was the game. At early APA meetings, that's the American Philosophical Association, it seemed to me as if the aim was to belittle others and count coup on one's intellectual adversaries. I was taught to write atrociously, dull, mechanical, and formulaic. I still have this problem. I sent 2 articles. I was requested that I put, one was that idealist thing over in England, and another was on William James somewhere. And I wrote in my usual non-professional way, sent them off, but because I was supposed to be some scholar about these things, I got back, "This is too pretty." That was the English reviewer. The British reviewer. "This is too pretty to be published in the journal of your stature." I thought I had finally succeeded and was happy not to publish it there. But this is what happens. I wasn't dull, mechanical, and formulaic enough. Any contemporary journal of philosophy will reveal the same. And I don't care who you are. You open those things and they are dry as dust. They just are. And even the greatest romantic Heideggerians, it's still you can figure it out before you get there. It's the same story. I was taught that philosophy must be rigorous, by which most folks mean the implication of some form of advanced deductive logic. I think it was simply rigor mortis. Advanced logic can be difficult, but understanding T.S. Eliot and Elizabeth Bishop is more difficult still, in large part because the answers are always developing and never static. Rote understanding is in the long run easier than creative apprehension. It may be difficult to create hydrogen bombs, although all of us can do it if we read the internet. It is, in my view, much more difficult to know what to do once such a thing has been created. To try to overcome, or at least to acknowledge, my professional training and its consequences, I often return to the question of where lovers of wisdom come from. So in younger years, I was simply fascinated by ancient philosophy and history and the marvels of human life. I also developed a deep affinity for non-human animals and for wildish places, as noted, swamps and northern forests in particular. I also love sports and music, a talent for the former, a desire for the latter. I simply liked to think about all these things. My first semester in college involved an introduction to philosophy course in which I discovered that my reflections had a place in a history. This course was in the hands of a crazy orchard farmer named Fred McConnell, whose nickname was Jigs. Both of his parents, by the way, studied with Hawking. So my introduction to Hawking was my first philosophy course. It was types of philosophy. And this guy, because it was out of print, he just kept boxes of them. He'd bring them into class on the first day, hand them out, and he handed them back in at the end. You didn't even have to lease them as we do now. Anyway, Fred's nickname was Jigs. And I don't have time for details here. Jigs and I became very close friends, both in the classroom and in his orchard. And this friendship plays a central role in what I would say about philosophy, or the love of wisdom. At that time, I had no idea that philosophy was a profession. It was simply what our conversations were. I cannot emphasize this point enough. It was my friendship with Jigs and my affinity for his passion that brought me fully to the love of wisdom. It was not simply the content of a textbook or the particularities of an argument. Jigs was in the conversation for keeps. Anybody played marbles? Anybody old enough to have played marbles? Well, playing marbles for keeps means if you lose, the other person gets you damn marbles. Right? And Jigs did philosophy for keeps. His conversations were real. I lost my place. Always good to be about honest these things. You go, get a drink of water. I don't have any. Playing for keeps. Here we go. He was never just playing. Ideas were for him the grounds upon which we lived. Once again, our premises. The point was not to take ourselves seriously as important thinkers, but to take the ideas seriously as the very ground of creating our own lives. So Randy's point earlier about talking about the ideas and not about people is a really important one, at least for a love of wisdom. The love of wisdom is, in the end, the love for creating a good life. So let's begin then by burning professional philosophy to the ground. That's my first suggestion. As with the seeds of the flowers in the Kalahari Desert, the seeds of our love of wisdom lie deep, and they are simply awaiting the nourishment to flower again. Finding that nourishment is no easy task. We must find a creative beginning in the middle of things, as it were, because you gotta create from where we're at. You can't go back. You can't walk in the future. You gotta be where you are and find a way to nourish that love of wisdom. In my walks with Emerson, I'm always reminded by him that we are fundamentally inferencing animals. That's what we do. We make inferences all the time. Right? He's an athlete. He's wearing shorts. He's cool. He's got glasses in his thing. Right? I don't know. Look at Randy. Make your inferences. I already told him earlier, I love that outfit. I just can't wear it myself. That is true. You know that's true. Right? And you look at this, right? Make your inferences. We all do this every day. I do this with my students all the time in class. I look around and say, you can pinpoint everybody back there. Riverman, you back there? Yeah, you look like Riverman, right? Well, look, you put on a 3-piece suit and you're no longer Riverman, right? So, and so, when Emerson says we're inferencing animals, we are always doing this. Is what we do. We're really good at it, and we cause all kinds of trouble doing it. But that's what we do. And I like that little thought about it. Our inferencing begins in perceiving the world around us. As for James and Peirce later on, for Emerson, perception is a continuous process that yields both things and relations, facts as well as meanings. So we don't just see the world as the podium. We see the world as the podium in Randy's house with the Institute, with a bunch of people who are some philosophers, some non-philosophers. All of this is going on at once. This is the world we're in at the moment. And some of us say, well, I'm really comfortable here, and some say, I don't fit in here. And we all have these things going on. I want us to pay attention to that, because this, for me, is where philosophy has always begun, as a love of wisdom. In the middle of things, wherever we are. In Walks with Emerson, I'm always reminded that we are the inferencing animals, and our inferencing begins with our perceptions of the world. Perception involves its own mode of inarticulate judgment. Thus, the vision of our intellect is not like the vision of the eye, but is union with things known. Right? So when we're perceiving, we are not just inheriting stuff from the external world. We are engaged in ways that are happening all the time. Driving a car, you better be engaged. I mean, I imagine most of you have had the experience of driving a car and coming awake at one moment and say, I've just been driving for 2 hours, not really been paying attention, but your body has been autopilot perceiving, inferring. If it's not, you get into trouble. And that's the kind of animal we need to see, that we're engaged in the world in this way. So in Buggee's response to the same question of perception, it may be better part of wisdom to realize that wisdom is not a form of knowledge which we can be strictly said to possess. Wisdom may better be conceived as giving us the strength and courage to be equal to our situation than as knowledge giving us command of it. So this Emersonian union is not an abstract connection, but the most basic of human interactions with the world. As Bugbee notes, we too often get caught up in the rationality of our being and not in its experience. We move past perception and forget we started there. So for Bugbee, if our reflections about reason keep getting focused on statements instead of partaking of the experiences of live thought, we would do better to reflect on the experience of playing a reasonable game of tennis, or even of perceiving a game played with some measure of alertness and gracefulness and absorption. And there's a reason Pele called football the beautiful game. If you watch, other than the people falling down with no good reason. If you look at the rest of the game, it's kind of an inarticulate beauty that's going on all the time. The movement, the flow, and you can tell, if you watch enough, you see the reasonable game or the aesthetic game as opposed to a badly played soccer game. And it's not because you read a text about it, it's because you are perceiving and inferring the structure of what's happening in front of you. In this vein, I note that many of my best conversations with jigs occurred out of doors while pruning apples or fixing machinery. Our thinking as perceiving inferencing leads itself from thought to thought, from wherever we are now to new grounds and new premises. In deduction, we are led by relations of inclusion and exclusion. In creative abductive thinking, we are led across vague borders and boundaries to places where inclusion and exclusion are no longer operative, or to new territories we had not yet suspected. And as Peirce often noted, perception and abduction are continuous processes. That is, we perceive the world, but at the same time we are going into inquiry about it all the time. And if you only have to think of the smell in the kitchen. Right? You walk in, cookies, I'm hungry. You walk in, what's that smell? Right? We get the perception, but it comes with an inference. So these are continuous processes of the human animal. And I've always liked that picture, and most all of the Americanists tell that same kind of story. So in a similar vein for Emerson, our most aboriginal thinking is led from perception by analogizing and associating. The efficacy of these thinkings is to be tested in further experiences. We learn to be good observers and perceivers, and this initial task of thinking leads to the seeking of our grounds and premises, our fundamental visions and beliefs. Perceiving and creative thinking, however, are not automatic. They require different sorts of attitudes and orientations. Primary among these was, for both Emerson and Bugbee, leaving our egotism at the door when we seek to know or to learn. The pest of society, Emerson believed, is egotists. 'Tis a disease that, like influenza, falls on all constitutions. This is akin to Peirce's first rule of reason, that we must have a genuine desire to learn and a willingness to be corrected. We always say we want to learn, but most of us are not willing to be corrected. And that's a difficult place to get, if you think about it. Just go back to your childhood and think about your parents telling you to do things. Most of us don't like to be corrected. You don't like to get C's on your exams or your papers. We don't like to be corrected. We don't like to be wrong. I'm not out of that game either, right? We all have a tendency to worry about that. But that's the attitude one needs to be a lover of wisdom. That attitude of being willing, really willing, to learn and to be corrected. Now, the antidote to this organic egotism, says Emerson, are the range and variety of attractions as gained by acquaintance, I want to emphasize, acquaintance with the world, not knowledge about the world, but acquaintance with the world. With men of merit, with classes of society, with travel, with eminent persons, and with the high resources of philosophy, art, religion, books, travel, society, and solitude. Why take an art history course? Because you will be a more interesting human. Simple as that. Simple as that. We'll just talk about what the humanities do and don't do, make you a better doctor and all that stuff. A wider range of natural and cultural experiences helps put us in our place. And again, you could, my dad was in World War II, he hated Japanese people. Hated them. Until he met one. And you meet him and the whole game's off. Things change. Acquaintance with things. I think Emerson is on to something with the notion of acquaintance. If you go back in time and look at what is called the liberal arts, they were called liberal not for political reasons, but because they are actually liberating. We should use the word now, liberating arts. They are arts and skills that liberate us from this kind of internal egotism that most of us are prone to live with because we're insecure human animals. Insecure human animals always want to be right. You don't want to be challenged. But if you're liberated, you see people live different ways, create different arts, play different musics. And one of the most fundamental things I've noticed everywhere I've traveled over the last 40 years is that when I get with philosophers, it's argumentation. I went to Germany, I don't know, 1993 or 4, gave a talk on wilderness, and it wasn't Santayana. I don't know, it was probably James. I can't remember actually what it was. No, it was Jonathan Edwards. It was at the School of Theology. And I was talking about Jonathan Edwards' early theology and the American wilderness. And of course, the Germans had no concept, what's a wilderness? They don't really have any. It's gone, long, long gone from Germany. And after that, we went down, of course, and you get a beer afterwards with the department chair. He looks across the table at me and says, not bad for an American. Right? That's philosophy conferences. But when I play music later at night with musicians, they want to learn new stuff. They want to integrate new stuff. They want to mix it up. You can play music anywhere in the world. And it's not about politics. It's not about metaphysics or ontology. This is about let's play music. And you learn from what they're doing, and they learn from what you're doing, and all of a sudden you got new music. Right? And this is ongoing. I know people make fun of hip-hop country music. They're working at it. It's going to get there. Right? And there's going to be a good one, and that good one will become the model. I hate it so far, but they're going to get there. And somebody's going to figure out that creative move for country hip-hop. I don't know which side is going to get it first. It'll probably be some combination, two wild characters who get together and make it. But this is the difference for me between working in a world of freedom and bars and music and working in a philosophy program where I go to a conference. And now, I'm being a little cynical, they're not all like that. There are lots of fun German folks and American folks and South American folks and so on. But there's this kind of edge to many philosophy places where it's this contest. So instead of wanting to learn, we're there to beat each other. And I think the music game is a better model for what we need to do if we want to be true lovers of wisdom. We must open, not close the road of inquiry, and lovers of truth will abstain from dogmatism. We must find an attitude of receptivity. I'm making this much longer than it was supposed to be. However, he told me to go long. So.
Yeah, well.
However, neither Emerson nor Bugbee offers a recipe or a set of rules for an attitude of receptivity in the art of thinking. These would be contrary to their notion of how it is we think best. Creating a receptive attitude is hard and difficult work. What's the hardest task in the world? Emerson asked. Thinking. We must remain awake and alert and focused, and at the same time we cannot be dominating, controlling, and leading. Our truth of thought, says Emerson, is therefore vitiated as much by too violent direction given to our will as by too great negligence. We must learn patience. Are you all patient? I know I'm not. Never have been. It is hard for me to be patient. But this patience, or what Bugbee calls patiency, is crucial to being someone who is a lover of wisdom. I keep losing my damn place because I'm talking about things that aren't here. We must learn patience. Ideas and perceptions take time. Always, said Emerson, our thinking is a pious reception. In the words of Jimi Hendrix, we need to become experienced. And in the words of Marvin Gaye, we need to be attentive to what's going on. Finding and creating our premises, the grounds upon which we are willing to live, begins with humble receptivity, but then we must turn to create upon these grounds and premises, always experimentally, always in transition and in response to changing experiences, and always in conversation with friends we trust, with folks like Chiggs. This, I think, is not a new thought, but it's radically distinct from the model of professional philosophy to which many of us have been trained. We must be able to imagine the possibilities engendered by our working premises, and we must be able to act on those premises in ways we hope will be ameliorative. And when our experiments fail, we must rethink our premises or reimagine their possibilities, or both. So I would like to move these reflections now to the story of a woman who was, in the sense of Emerson and Bugbee, a lover of wisdom, though by no measure a professional philosopher. Her story seems to be a measure of what is possible when one perceives, imagines, and inquires with an absence of arrogance. So I'm going to end with this story. A little over a century ago, in 1909, Spokane, Washington, was the site of a free speech battle engaged by the Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world. They were our version of communism for a while. Into that battle came a 19-year-old Irish-American woman from Concord, New Hampshire. Her name was Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, a defender of women's rights and abilities, birth control, and women's suffrage. Flynn found the Wobblies amenable because they included women in the contest for the amelioration of workers' lives. She was moved and motivated by what she had felt and experienced around her. She knew American poverty. She knew cultural exclusion. But that's why, if you're not from New England, the Irish were not good people in New England. They were ostracized, they were beaten, they were punished, they were sent to the wars to serve for us in order to become citizens, all kinds of things. The Irish were sort of the South end of New England culture. And most of them lived in Southie, in Boston. Tough neighborhood. She knew cultural exclusion. She knew the lousy conditions of labor. She knew the factory life of New England, where he lives now. Huge gray mills, like prisons, barrack-like company boarding houses, long hours, low wages, long periods of slack. I saw lard, she said, instead of butters on neighbors' tables. Children without underwear in cold New England winters. A girl scalped by an unguarded machine in a mill across the street from our school. I saw an old man weeping as they put him in the lockup as a tramp. In the sense that both Emerson and Jimi Hendrix intended, she was experienced. She knew the facts and the feelings of the working poor. At the same time, she was attentive to the spiritual or higher laws that others ignored. Through her experiencing, she sympathetically apprehended, as William James might say, the aesthetic and moral meanings of her world. She was attentive, aware, and awake. Why did good, hard-working people suffer so, she asked. Why were there rich people who apparently did little but enjoy life? I have seen, she told Congress, she was taken to Congress for being a communist later, I have seen, she told Congress, textile workers who wove beautiful woolen fabrics shivering for lack of warm clothing, and coal miners living in cold shacks in company towns and steel towns that were armed camps. She drew inferences and spent her life in activism and writing, or as she saw it, in trying to make things better, trying to bring the actual into line with the ideal. After leaving the Wobblies, she became a socialist and then a communist, but she was never a classroom reformer. Her communism was a function of her experiences and her attentiveness to them. The social activism of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn is seemingly straightforward. She did not begin with theory and argumentation. She learned an experiential vocabulary from her natural and social environment: poverty, exclusion, hunger, emptiness, suffering. In these natural facts, she found the meanings of injustice, dishonesty, and imbalance, thereby revealing the higher laws of justice, honesty, and harmony. These facts and laws became the grounds upon which she lived her life. Nature and culture provided her a platform of perspective from which to see that these were not her idiosyncratic beliefs. These ideas warranted her working commitment and provided a place from which to launch her criticism as well as her productive and constructive labors. Hers was the poetry of a world of fairness, inclusion, and hope. Her life and her thinking were ameliorative. This is the often overlooked element in Emerson's story of receptivity. The lawyer is thought more useful and more practical than the intellect, the thinker. The lawyer studies, follows, and learns to manipulate the rules. But the rules are derivative from other premises and become essentially restrictive and conservative. They are meant to constrain and mechanize the thinker. For Emerson, it is only through the difficult work of the intellect receptive that we can most fully begin to improve our worlds. 'Tis inhuman, Emerson wrote, to want faith in the power of education, since to ameliorate is the law of nature, and the men and women are valued precisely as they exert onward or ameliorating force. So I judged Elizabeth Gurley Flynn in just this fashion. It's not about whether she was a communist, whether she was in my party, or whether I even agree to her means. She exerted an onward and ameliorating force. She was an exemplary Emersonian American scholar, and she was a natural lover of wisdom. Lovers of wisdom do not always appear in graduate programs in philosophy, nor in professional departments of philosophy. Given my experience, I'm actually inclined to think that such locations actually may harbor many clever minds, but few lovers of wisdom. In thinking of the poetry of William Carlos William, Bugbee says, "Now for me, philosophy is in the end an approximation to the poem, a structure built upon your own ground, your ground where you stand on your feet. We are reaching for those foundations of ours that lie hidden below the surfaces we are willing and able to expose to public view. With jigs, I found farming a good place to seek these grounds. And as I tell my students time and again, we most often first find our philosophical inclinations not in philosophy, and not in philosophy texts, but in our everyday experience. I hear Bugbee when I consider this." This is Bugbee speaking. "It was music which first awakened me to the need for reflection. But for the music which aroused and defined a sense of the unconditioned reality in me, I doubt I would have found it relevant to reflect on our condition in any way that drew me to the works of philosophers as speaking to that condition. Since those earliest days of philosophic study, I have remained concerned with the works of philosophers, not in themselves, but as helps to the understanding of experience." This comes back to the point about the ideas being primary. "It will be ever important to me to give attention to technical philosophy," he said, "but I will never be able to take technical philosophy as the ultimate phase of reflective life." So I think every lover of wisdom has her or his music. For me, it was a mystery of life in swamps and cold October mornings. And as I look back on the first 3 philosophy papers I wrote, which I still have, for God knows what reason, I find poetry is another source of my reflection. Frost, my November guest, Eliot's Four Quartets, and Paul Simon's Sound of Silence. Those are my first 3 philosophy papers. I think it is worth our effort to find our own sources of reflection and to beware of the professional classifications that makes us into Persians and Kantians. And that is longer than I expected. Every day, said Thoreau, is a good day if we but know what to do with it. Such knowledge is not easy to come by. I must be able to perceive the meanings possible in the day. Living through the pretensions of convention, place, power, position, and the past will yield only more pretension. We must relinquish our pretensions in any attempt to own our own premises and visions. The danger, as I see it, is that we come to skate freely on the surfaces without existential purchase, and we lose the passion of our deepest and most experiential inspirations, and then we lose our genuine love of wisdom. That's it.
A dialogue is now possible.
You say not possible?
Now possible.
Now possible. I don't like microphones. Or we can drink beer.
Beer is
Or wine.
consistent with there being dialogue.
Do you need a can of beer? Or,
No, I know, I'm fine.
Yeah, really?
Do we need to change philosophy departments? That's not a very, I'm not sure that's even a very intelligent question, given what you said, but it's one way of approaching it.
I would get rid, well, I know this is an issue here at SIU, and I don't want to do it in that way. I would eventually get rid of departments. I mean, ask yourself as a philosopher, how many times you talk with scientists during the day or the week, or artists or musicians. Now, there's some who do. But
It's hard to do that.
it is, because they're in that building, you're in this building, they got more money than you, you got less money than them. And the reason our building is, we philosophers are with environmental science. That's how the building was constructed, because it's philosophy of environmental philosophy building, and that building is meant to put us together. But even there now, not in the past, they were together, but now we're kind of a little bit fractured. So yes, I think departments are part of the problem. And if you split up the money pie that way, right now there are programs like Chicago that don't do it that way, but we are mostly stuck. I think that's one mechanism we could use to begin to.
Do you have any suggestions for how to ameliorate the department system?
Burn it down. I've been fighting this stuff for I don't know how many years, a long time. You've probably been fighting it even longer.
It's very familiar.
And I think, my own cynical view is that it will collapse under its own weight. You can only build so many football stadiums with so much money and so few teachers that finally, if you look at American high schools, when I went to high school, my teachers were brilliant, and they were mostly women, and they were women who couldn't go into other fields. And they knew stuff, and they were smart, and they were great teachers. But those teachers are not there anymore because women don't have to go there, and we have turned high school teachers into interchangeable parts, like any factory. And I don't know how many of you have PhDs. You're not able to teach in high school.
Really?
Yeah, you can go teach in university, but you're not allowed to teach in high school because you got to go get some other kind of training. I think those kinds of things are nonsense, and I think with the bureaucracies we build. But how do you get rid of them? You got to burn it down. I think it will collapse under its own weight. I think people starting new small schools might be what will happen. I expect I'll be dead long before any of this transpires. So no, I don't have any good answers. Maybe other people have good answers.
I would say, in your changing of structure, change the way you're evaluated. And having been a professor briefly, not nearly as long as many of you in the room, I do remember being a part of committees to figure out annual merit pay with the teaching research service
Yeah.
factor, and academia needs to vastly rethink the service factor so that people can be out in their communities doing the very things you're saying in the paper of being a part of the community and experiencing everyday things and have that count so you can be enabled to participate.
Or even having teaching count. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's true, but unfortunately, it's gone the other direction. It's just continuing to go the other direction. We tried to put collegiality into our departmental. So we had a fourth, right? You got to be a nice person. The dean made us take it out. We can't count collegiality as one of our elements of review. And that means you get a lot of assholes in departments. It really is, and that's a problem. It's a problem how to run a program when you have one or two people who, for whatever reasons, want to do their own thing and don't want to work towards the common goals of the program. But I think the whole assessment business, I think you're right, needs to be redone. But again, I feel like Don Quixote when it comes to that. I had very little success with any changes. And I don't see any systemic changes coming. Others of you have less cynical views. Yeah.
Do you think that the professionalization in philosophy is largely a symptom of the wider culture, or do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier. I don't know who brought up. You brought up Elliott. When Harvard and Johns Hopkins became professional programs, they instituted all the things we're doing now. But even before that, if you think about our classrooms, whether it's grade school or the university, why do we have schedules and rooms the way we do? Because John Amos Comenius in the 1600s in Germany decided that that's what we should do. And we inherit that. We didn't even think about it. I take my classes walking pretty routinely just to get out of those places. They feel awful, like little prisons. And why should I be standing up, yelling down at them all the time? I mean, maybe there's occasion where that needs to happen. But a lot of the time we should be at equal high level in having a conversation. So yeah, I think there's a lot of structures there that we would do well to reform. It's just really because the bureaucracy is so top-heavy. It's very, very difficult. And statistically, when I did, well, they've done newer studies, but year 2005, Penn State over the 40 years had increased administrators by 40% and faculty by 4% while increasing students by over 4%. So you can see that the students are getting less and less attention. They're getting more and more administrators, many of whom call meetings. Who said bewildering? Well, my bewilderment in going to a meeting is not what's the right answer, but why are we here? I've gone to meetings, I have no clue about what in the world's going on, but that's what we've created with the bureaucratic structure. I don't think that's unique to universities. I think you're right, it's part of our larger cultural structure. The very idea that you professionalize anything.
Do you think that it's the task of philosophers to set a new ideal? Or
Well, I think it's the task of anybody who cares about these things to try to fix them or make them better. And I don't think it just has to be philosophers. I think there are plenty of academics and plenty of people in other fields. I don't know if any of you worked in a large corporation, but it's pretty easy to get a middle manager who's a real jerk. You can't get rid of that person. They can't move up. They don't get thrown out. And you end up working for that person. It's very inhuman. So I think, yeah, we've built a lot of structures in the culture. And the university system, again, with those two first research universities, they began to compartmentalize and separate and chunk up the money in different ways. And I think Charles Eliot was an ass. Everything I've read about him, he's the one who kept Peirce from becoming a teacher at Harvard against James's wishes. And they went to school together, and they didn't like him, so they just didn't hire him. I think it's a bad way to operate. And this tier 1 stuff, tier 2 research universities, it's nonsense. It's an argument, not the discussion we had years ago. When my grandmother wanted me to go to Harvard. Right? Both my grandfathers went to Harvard together, which is a bizarre thing. My grandmothers went to Sargent, which is in Boston, but it's a women's school. And they all hung out together. And my grandmother said that Harvard was the only place to go. And you see that kind of arrogance in a culture. It's just, first of all, it's bad ethics. It's kind of immoral. The other side of it is there are great teachers everywhere in this country, from every little school you go to the biggest universities. And in fact, I find most of the best teachers are at smaller places. And those are the people who are doing the work that I think needs to be done to ameliorate culture, to liberate students and citizens to a better life. And we don't aim that direction. I think the institutions are aiming at winning the game of U.S. World News and World Reports listings. I'm making this sound depressing. I don't mean to do that. I just think it's where we're at. And if you look at any time in history, there are things that need to be fixed, and we got our own things that need to be fixed or addressed. And these two are some of the things.
Yeah, I think one thing I was kind of moved, I guess, thinking about you and where you've gotten in your philosophy and your life, I suppose, to this point. That was a lovely thing. All right, now I'm going to attack them in a rivalrous way.
I've known this guy a long time.
Yeah. Well, no, not really though. But I guess one thing, I was trying to square the stuff about like melting the lines and not identifying with the school, or with the real hostility toward analytic philosophy. Do you see what I mean? Like the war still sounds pretty similar to me. You know what I mean? Like we're still kind of prosecuting H.A. or something like that. You know what I mean? And,
Well, he prosecuted himself.
Well, and he prosecuted philosophers who were outside of his little, narrow vision of philosophy in the 30s or whatever. But I still hear like sort of this rivalry among schools still kind of emerging in that in what you just read too.
I do have a position which I'm offering. It's not that I don't stand somewhere in the universe. I got premises, and theirs are not mine. So in that sense, there are philosophical enemies. But there's another.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that I would associate specific premises with analytic philosophy either. I mean, I don't want to sit here and defend analytic philosophy, but the picture it seems a little distorted, right? Like that they're all deducing, results from accepted premises or something like that. See, like if you had a real hard-ass analytic philosopher or whatever, like that's not the way they think of what they're doing.
I know.
Like they would undercut any premises. Right, they're not like deploying a set of, or on there anyway. I'm just saying, but what I'm more interested in is like where the dialogue could emerge, or what in that tradition could be of use, or in a dialogue with what the kind of thing that you're wanting.
I think the first thing we do is get rid of the categories, and that takes time, and that is happening in some ways. It is happening. But I'm looking at the picture.
But aren't you re-emphasizing the categories?
I didn't succeed.
That's true.
So but there's another side of this, and that is that they are the dominant mainstream. They see themselves that way. So they are colonizing all the time. They are beating people. They have satellites, right? How did feminism get in there? It's still not in the center unless it's analytic feminism. And if you're doing Gloria Enzo Dewey, you are not in the middle of the APA meeting. So part of that animosity is about the politics of it, not just about the philosophy. I like logic. I do that stuff. I can read that stuff. I've read it my whole career. That's where I started. It's not that I think it's wholly terrible. But if you look at this as a political structure, what happened in philosophy, then they dominate in a way that's problematic. We were talking earlier about, my colleague here, Tom Alexander, is clearly to be one of the best readers of Dewey ever. And they turned down his book because he didn't put the famous people in it. See, that's the kind of thing where you get the politics dominating. So when I'm talking about analytic philosophy, it's part of the A.J. Ayer, Bertrand Russell stuff, but it's all the arrogance of this domination model. And that's the stuff that really bothers me. So you will hear, I'm not going to relinquish that anger.
Right, but you might look for spots where you could cross, or like moments of, okay.
I do read Richard Rorty. I do read Robert Graham. It's not that I have abandoned the idea that these people could have good ideas. I don't like John Rawls, but not as a human, but what he's doing. Because I think other political philosophers, again from the ground up, Bell Hooks, I think is a much better political philosopher for me than John Rawls, because she starts and works through the experiences. Now, better doesn't mean you can't talk across Rawls and Bell Hooks. I agree with that. But you're right. You heard right. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering what we could. I'm kind of thinking about how to make philosophy more of a collaborative endeavor rather than an antagonistic one in recent years. And one of the obvious things we can do as philosophers is reach out to people and work on projects together and stuff like that. But I was wondering if you thought of anything else more concretely to make it more collaborative.
Well, I think the story of jigs is an important one. You have to get to know somebody well enough that when you disagree with them, you can actually live with it. And we have to get over, in the profession, we have to get over, he's a Heideggerian, or, she's a Rawlsian. There's another branding flaw, which is what he's pointing out that I've been doing. But to get over that, you have to get to know somebody. And so I think your answer is the right answer. How do you get over racism when you know a white guy like me? Well, you play some basketball, right? And you get to meet people, and you learn that, hey, they're like
Because
chicken.
other philosophers aren't so bad at it.
Yeah, right. No, but well,
basketball. You wouldn't go that far.
I was going to turn that around actually to find out that you are not so different after all. Yeah, the other way around I think is problematic because this is still the colony thing. You have to learn about yourself through it. I've been playing basketball in Germany one time with 2 kids from Peru, a crazy German, a guy from Sweden. None of us spoke the same languages, but we spoke basketball. Right? And on the side of the court is American hip-hop music, blaring from a little boombox. And that's where it happens. Where it gets, so I think you're on the right trail there. Talking to, when's the last time you talked to a chemist? If you're a philosopher. Or a jazz musician who's teaching across, we have a great jazz program at UNT. How often do I get over there? They're in another building, it's time, it's meetings, you only see them. So I think your answer is the right answer. We have to create ways for that to happen, other than the dean's meetings. And I think that's important.
Yeah, so I don't have a question so much as a comment, and I wanted to give it here instead of just afterwards, for 2 reasons. One, to give people a little bit of hope, and 2, to plug something that will give you hope. So I'm very much, and some of my colleagues are very much feeling the same way about professional philosophy as you articulated, particularly as being women in philosophy. We have a much harder time being taken seriously just because of our anatomy. We've been asked quite seriously, and this is a real thing, where I have been asked, are you sure you want to get a PhD? Wouldn't you rather have a family? So what a colleague of mine did was she created a program herself, and she talked to the right people, and she got funding, and she calls it Engendering Dignity in Philosophy. And what it is it's a program that she piloted with another graduate student to bring philosophy out into the community. So what that entailed was getting funding and permission to go teach inside a women's prison. And so it was half university students, half incarcerated students going into a women's prison and holding a class once a week. And these are the sorts of things that we can do within the structures of our programs and the structures of our departments that the university loves because it makes them look really good and like look at how we're engaging with the community. So that gives the bureaucrats big pats on the back. And it gives us new generation of philosophers who are trying to do this kind of philosophy, but at the same time have anxiety about not getting a job because we do it. It gives us something as like a selling point, right? So then once we actually get into the field, then generationally, right, we can start to change and shift the culture. But we got to start doing it with things like the EDIT program that my friend did. And, it's something that you got to get paperwork signed and you got to find money, right? So it's not easy to do it. But if you talk to enough people and get enough people inspired across disciplines, we're working with the criminal justice department, we're working with the law school, in addition to the prison system, right? This is the sort of ideal philosophy class that Doug was talking about. I've been able to experience inside a prison, sitting down around a table with incarcerated women and Marquette students. And it's been the most transformative experience that I've had as a teacher, but also as a learner. So there is hope. We're trying really hard, and it is really hard, but we just need more of that going on, and just for other people to know, like, you can do that. You can still make it work within the structure, even though it feels like the structure is going to beat the humanity out of you. And it's not going to be easy, and you will feel beat, but it's possible.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And the issue of women in philosophy and the profession is rather dire and extreme. So that's another topic altogether. It's certainly relatable.
Yes.
I taught the food people, I taught agriculture, I taught engineering, I taught architecture. I've taught with pretty much every department ever. But you're right about the bureaucracy. They'll take it if it gives them a little bit of visibility, but the difficulty is the red tape is extensive. So trying to get that culturally off the ground is difficult. Even I agree with you, and we do these things. We're fighting against a structure that really doesn't make it easy.
Okay, you got some?
Yeah, I guess I'd want to go back to Crispin's question or issue. I mean, could you talk to us about when you end up forgiving somebody who has been a real freaking jerk to you? In other words, a lot of the divisions within philosophy are long-standing arguments between people who now really hate each other. And I'm asking, at what point do you, or could you say your position, or give us a sense of your position about when you just say, I'm sorry, and or I forgive you, and or I still hate your guts because you're always going to be a bad person. But these are the real questions. I mean, these are questions for folks in their 30s and 40s who are coming up through, who are beginning to form some of these antagonistic relationships. So I'm wondering, I don't want to be a dupe.
No,
I don't want to be hurt.
Yeah, I think it has to, but we know in human history that always has to begin with the oppressor. I mean, the vision will come from the margins, from the oppressed. But the actual other side of that, the reset, the actual transformation has to begin with the oppressor. So, analytic philosophers always talk to me in that way. I mean, look, I've had a whole career of you're not a philosopher. From the time I started to now, I used to write things about Emerson all the time. Until Stanley Cavell published on Emerson, nobody else could. So I can yell about this all day long. I mean, that's the experience that you undergo. So if an analytic philosopher comes up and says, well, we can, they do this. I mean, my friend at Temple was really good at it.
Schuster.
No.
Margolis.
Margolis.
Oh, yeah.
Joe Margolis is one of the greatest human beings in the world. He crosses those bridges all the time with no worries about it at all. He's a great model. But they come up and say, well, we're doing it too, and why don't you just come talk with us? Well, the answer is, you've just told me for 40 years you're not a philosopher. And so it's got to start with the people in power. You want me to forgive you, well, give me a reason. And that reason isn't, we do it too, or we do it better, or you're almost there. And the answer has to be a genuine, trusting conversation, and those have been, in my experience, hard to find. Joe Margolis is a radical exception to that. And Joe and I could talk about anything in the history of philosophy or analytic philosophy. We'd argue about Quine, we'd argue about Putnam, and it was just two guys talking about love and wisdom. But that's different than when somebody comes at you with, you can come do Peirce with us now, or you can come do Dewey with us now, or you can come do James and Emerson with us now that we're doing it. That's a different way of engaging. So I think, I don't think there's anyone I have to forgive in particular. But my point would be that if somebody wants to start that conversation, it really has to begin with the dominating force.
With what?
The people who are in power, in control of a profession or a school or anything else. And young people can overcome that pretty quickly by not getting engaged. But don't come and tell me it didn't happen, which is what I got from some kids from Oregon. Oh, we're over that. You're not over it, you're living through it. Right? That history has not gone away. If you're a woman in philosophy, it is not over. Right? We were up to 26%, we're down to 23%. We're not moving forward. And sexual harassment in philosophy departments is rampant. Right? This is a long history, so you can't say we're over it now, we're just better because we hired two women. Right? This is a lingering thing, and that transition that transformation for me must begin in the heart of people who are in domination. They have to hear what women are saying. They have to hear why aren't there more African American philosophers? They get money for grad school. Why the hell would you want to go? A bunch of white dudes logicking out why racism isn't really there anymore. I'm giving you extreme views, but that's the
pretty
kind of stuff
common.
I've been through.
It's a pretty common
Yes, it's very common.
perspective about history.
And I don't know if I'm giving you a good answer. I think young people are in a position because they didn't live through the history to begin to overcome it. The same way my kids went to school with African Americans, Chinese Americans, everything else. I didn't do that. They just grew up with a different look at race than I did. So for me, where does racism get over? It can't be Lehman telling me I'm an old white racist and I need to get over it. It has to be me thinking about transforming what I am. So I don't know about the forgiveness question. It's not like I hate people, really. I say that all the time. I don't mean it so much. There are a few I do, but they can be in American philosophy too. It's not, it's not something that has to do with your philosophical privilege. And I know this also, if you're not in philosophy, this sounds kind of cheesy, and who cares? But it has to do with the American education and world education. I think that's important.
Well, it's the same thing at the Sawmill or the Waffle House.
It is, yeah.
I mean, it's not different in kind. How it is that human beings end up entangled in disagreements with one another that require forgiveness to begin with. It's all in Royce, right? That we end up entangled in these situations where the restoration of the community, whatever that community may be, requires atonement. I actually disagree with Doug. I don't think it ever starts with the oppressors. I think it always starts with the oppressed. But since I'm a white man in a white man's profession, I don't. So I mean, nobody ever told me I wasn't doing real philosophy, and I have a feeling that it's because I'm a white man.
Well, no, you told me I don't do philosophy.
Well, you don't.
But
I meant it as a compliment.
I didn't mean to say that the problem isn't exposed by the oppressed. I mean, we don't ever learn about it unless Du Bois writes about it or Anne Sedou or Bell Hooks. If they don't write about it, we're not going to hear about it.
Sure.
They don't have voices. But the point is that we have to hear that and begin to self-transform. That's what I mean.
Well, I agree with that. That the
begin-
self-transformation is the beginning of the oppressed is the beginning of the transformation of the oppressor, right? I mean, you have to be transformed by your experience of being oppressed in order to begin to communicate, not by your words, but by your being, what it would be like to encounter with nonviolent resistance, and it is a form of resistance, what the oppressors are doing. You got to speak truth to power. Okay.
We sound like philosophers now.
Well, it might be time.
It is.
It might be time to dialogue in a less formal setting.
I think that's right.
And so I think we should all thank Doug for his